So would you like to restate that we call the meeting to order?
Yeah, that was a good practice.
Just practice.
So calling the meeting to order, our role business is consideration of the May 7th, 2024 minutes. There were some suggestions for corrections. I made those on the minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes? Motion to approve. All those in favor? Unanimous. Consideration of the May 28th, 2024 minutes. That was the same. We had a few edits in them. I've made those corrections. Lenny had a couple good pickups. So I'll bring this to the town office once we approve it. Do I have a motion to approve the 28th? Motion approved. All those in favor?
Listen,
Sorry. Oh, we are very lucky today to have two things. We've got Dave Rowe and we've got some partners in Rome and over in Lakes. Association President Bird playing yet. Chris, you want to?
yeah, I mean, I'm gonna start out. Hi, everybody. Dave Rope is gonna talk to us. I guess we could talk forever. If any ideas on focusing in on, I guess we wanted to talk about septic for sure, but you have many other comments that were all very pertinent to what we're doing.
Yeah, the buffer, vegetative buffers was my other area that I commented on, and everybody concentrates or focuses on the vegetation, the trees. And I think the soil is far more important than the trees. I can show you place after place after place. I'm a licensed forester, a soil scientist, a wetland scientist, and a site evaluator, so I did a lot of stuff, and I was a state soil scientist for 33 years, so I went all over the state and I see all kinds of stuff. There's a ton of forest out there that invasive earthworms have gotten into. They chew up the organic matter, there's no organic depth, and they make the surface layer kind of firm. And so you get runoff, all the snow melt and rain that even though it drips down, it runs off. And if you have runoff going into the lake, you're bringing nutrients. If it goes into the ground, the soil and the microbes and the plants will absorb a lot of the nutrients and they won't make it. So a lot of the soil surface is not receptive to infiltration. And then a lot of people like to smooth the ground and make it kind of nice and pretty between the place and the lake. And that means runoff can make it into the lake too. So my recommendation is to have a lot more focus on what the conditions of the soil are like and not. I would restrict people from being able to alter that ground, keeping the trees there, but not the herbaceous layer of the brush, and smoothing it, breaking the leaves. They should encourage it to be able to infiltrate the runoff water. That's a huge impact, I think.
So if you had leaves and duff, would that keep earthworms from, I mean, earthworms are invasive.
Yes,
In the United States, right? I mean,
well, no, above the glacial area, which was like somewhere in Pennsylvania and Ohio.
right,
South of that, they didn't get wiped out, but they got wiped out with the glaciers.
okay.
So they only advance very slowly, so they get brought up with plants and stuff like that.
But Dave, are you talking about this new invasive earthworm that's relatively new in this area?
No, not the jumping.
You're talking about the regular.
That's one of them.
Just earthworms.
Night crawlers, yeah.
Yeah.
There are no native worms in Maine.
Okay.
That,
That's something I learned from a forestry standpoint that I was shocked by, that, they're
they all
invasive.
die. But earthworms, you won't find them in softwood forests, because they don't like softwood trees. And if the soil is droughty, sandy, gravelly, they can't survive there. So, we have places where you have organic duff because the earthworms are present, but anything that was converted to agriculture almost always has lots of earthworms. I got a slide I can show folks sometime. It's up in Skowhegan, where they have the Yankee Woodlot. I don't know if anybody remembers hearing about the Yankee Woodlot. It was a cooperative extension, public radio, television show that showed forestry practices over a number of years. I got asked to do some workshops up there. And there's a ridge of land out back of their office that's mapped as a Bangor soil, which is like a caribou soil, which is our best agricultural soil we have in the state of Maine. And you go out there and it's got sugar maples and basswood and oak that this big around. I mean, it is incredibly fertile. And there isn't an inch of organic matter anywhere. And then you go towards the end of this ridge and all of a sudden it's hemlocks and it's pit and mound topography. There's organic duff this thick. And there was not an earthworm to be found. That's what that was before they converted it to agriculture. And it's been probably 100 years since it was agriculture, and there's still no organic duff. Because earthworms just incorporate the organic matter. So this will always stay hardened forest. It won't revert back to what it was because the worms won't let it.
So from a ordinance standpoint, I think I put that in the latest, and so removal of organic duff, leaf raking and smoothing of the natural pit and mound topography prohibited within 100-foot buffer. On properties where the duff has been removed and where the pits and mounds have been smoothed, a layer of erosion control mix must be put down over the affected area. So that's language that came from you and seems to make sense. Does that seem if we tried to go in that direction with an ordinance, that would make sense and probably cover much of what you just described?
Yeah, the organic stump grindings, a lot of you are familiar with erosion control mix material. It's rough, round wood that's long and fibrous and it kind of interlocks and it's got a little bit of soil, so it's got weight, it doesn't float away. Wood chips don't work. So if water runs across it, it'll have to filter down through that material and it'll get a lot of the nutrients like phosphorus will be removed. So if you have soil that won't infiltrate because it's been modified or altered, then you can do that. I've done this with the DOT for some of their projects, like the 395 is gonna connect now from Brewer to Eddington. There's a bypass. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but to connect with the airline. You know, right now you take 395 to Route 1A, go down to Holden, across to 9. Well, it's going out. They had some areas in there that they couldn't use detention ponds because they didn't have room, so they had to use buffer strips, and the soil didn't meet their requirements. So they had me come up and I helped them alter the sites so that they would be able to infiltrate. That's one of the techniques. So it's a way, you know, if runoff water doesn't go straight into the lake, then it's gonna get filtered. And so to me, that is absolutely critical. You can have a forest with 10 great big trees, nothing's going underneath it because they're big and they shade. And you've got ground that may not have organic duff. It's not doing much of anything except just providing shade. It's holding some soil in place, but if the soil above the big roots is firm and water runs across it, you'll still have erosion. So the idea is to prevent erosion and prevent stormwater from directly entering into the lake. And that was my recommendation.
Right. Why don't we switch to septic? We received the break ordinance, draft ordinance for Keyser Lake, and that seems to make sense. The question, one question I had was the difference between an inspection and an evaluation. That starts getting technical, and I don't have a technical background for septic. Maybe you could outline the difference between inspection and evaluation.
The state has implemented this. I brought a copy of the latest septic system rule. In it, there's a chapter now on septic system inspections. There never was. It was kind of guidelines. But now that it's required in the shoreline zone upon property transfer, so inspection is an official term and it's described. What I recommended to the folks on Keys Lake was that once you do the initial inspection and you're looking for short circuits or weeping places or other problems, you don't need to dig holes and investigate the septic, the leach field anymore. If it's not short circuiting and you looked at it once, it's not gonna. It's the type of thing that's gonna happen right off, or it's not gonna happen. So if it's not short circuiting, all you really care about is if wastewater is coming to the surface and running into.
Is that short circuiting, what you just said?
No,
Waste
short
coming to the surface?
circuiting, no, short circuiting is if you got sand and you put wastewater and it goes right down to the sand into the groundwater table with no treatment.
Gotcha.
That's what I call a short circuit. Cause the state plumbing code is happy with that. Because the way their concern is pathogens. And the way they control pathogens is the time it takes from the wastewater getting into the ground to get to the lake or the well. And if they put it far enough away, the bugs will die, but nutrients don't die. So that's not included in their
That's it.
plans. So that's the thing, everybody says it's working wonderful. What I'm saying it's not, it's putting 100% of nutrients in the lake.
That's it.
If it comes to the surface, that's definition of a malfunction, which is a failure that's in the plumbing code. And you can do that by looking at it. So after
But a
you,
short, how do you discover a short circuit? Through an inspection,
yes,
and is that taking pits to see
you
what?
have to, you can use, what I use is a little hand auger. It's about this big around, 3/4 inch in diameter. It's a screw. You screw it into the ground, pull it out, and out comes some soil. If a system is not short circuiting, the soil will be wet underneath the disposal field, and they should be some, we call it a biomat. Microbes and particles and stuff, it accumulates. That's why leach fields are as big as they are, because water going into the ground can't go as fast if some of it's plugged. If it's clean water, you don't need it for a big area, but over time, some of it gets clogged. And that's a good thing, because there's a lot of treatment. But if that's not there, and the system's been in 10 or 15 years, then that means everything is going right straight down into the groundwater table. And it's always gonna happen, only gonna happen in sand and gravel, or if it's sitting on fractured bedrock. If you got a fine textured soil, it's not gonna short circuit the cable. It's only gonna be sand, gravel, and fractured bedrock. And you got a lot of sand and gravel.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
If we're in a gravel pit.
Are these inspectors certified? I'm
They are,
embarrassed to say I used to live in Massachusetts. And I've recently gone through some septic issues with my son's house in Title V. So the inspectors are certified, so someone would have to get a Maine certified inspector.
now, this is the tricky part. The only inspections that are required by law are property transfers in the shoreline zone. That's it. Nowhere
Fine
else.
transfer,
Right, in a property transfer, somebody sells a place in the shoreline zone.
not inherited,
And
not transfer of inheritance, but sold.
I don't think so. The way it sounds is if you buy a place. So that's the only place that's required by law, and that's the only place inspections are required. Anybody else that has a septic system that has it looked at, it doesn't have to be that inspection, and it doesn't have to be by anybody certified.
And Keyser Lake is requiring it upon inheritance or transfer. They've added the inheritance part.
Yeah, well, see, the idea was if somebody's buying it, they got the money to have it inspected. And it's not a burden on somebody that just come up to somebody that's got a place in the shoreline zone, say you gotta have it inspected. Maybe they're elderly and they've been there a long time, and they don't have a lot of money, so they didn't wanna put a burden on them. So they figure out when it changes hands, it's a good time to do it. Obviously, it's a good time to do it most any time if if you're in the shoreline zone.
So can we see a list of what the inspectors inspect for, like the Title V in Massachusetts has distribution box? I mean, they
Yes.
open up your tank, they look. at
That's
your
spelled out
distribution
in these
box. Okay.
rules now, and they're online, you can, anybody that wants to, if you go to the state. Subsurface wastewater disposal unit. If you Google that, it's not program, it's unit. You
Hard to find.
can see the copy of the rules and
Yep.
in there, so now it specifies all the things you have to look at. And they also require digging pits in the disposal field to look at whether that's. You know, they don't have you look for a short circuit, they don't want water to be ponded in it, so it's almost coming to the surface, or it is. That's the only thing they look for, not if there's no water in it, that's fine.
And what needs to be in the shoreline zone, the leach field or the property, the home structure itself, or?
For these rules, it's a septic system. Because they only deal with septic systems.
But not the leach field,
Part of my
That's
septic,
part of it, that is the septic.
so it's included.
my initial tanks with pump out tanks are in the zone, but the septic, the leach field is 150 feet up the driveway, which is out of the zone. So that be required?
That would be a good one to have them discuss and decide what to do, because half of it is and half of it isn't.
My situation is the same. My tank is in the shoreline zone, but my leach field is outside the shoreline zone.
Me too.
Yeah, I don't know, I'd have to see if it says that in here in particular. But that's the kind of thing that's probably gonna be ironed out over time, because, you know. But to be truthful, the disposal field is what really matters the most.
The leach field.
Yeah, leach fields.
I mean, old systems. When they had metal tanks, that's a different thing, because they get holes in them, in fact, they rust out.
Yeah.
But concrete tanks that were generally.
Yeah.
They're much more durable, so the leach field's a biggie, but I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
You know, I don't work in the program, so I don't know, if it was me, I'd say if you got any part of your systems in the shoreline zone is inspected.
Yeah, sure.
So the Keyser Lake one also goes a little bit steeper in saying they're gonna require inspections. If your system is not recorded, like so old that there's no record of your system,
That's an ordinance, that would have to be an ordinance.
that's what they're doing, an ordinance, and if.
You're talking about the Brink, draft ordinance for
Yeah.
Keyser Lake, okay?
And then they also say if you're identified in the state soil survey as being a bedrock area. And so I looked at that. Which was fun to find and look at. And then they have a caveat in there saying this is just an estimate, it's not actual. So if you adopt something similar to Keyser. Who's gonna determine bedrock versus non-bedrock, because they're like fall in the category 1, they have to be done right away, versus if you're outside of bedrock, you're category 2 and you have two or 3 years or something like that. So that seems a little wiggly
Well, if
too.
you have a septic system designed since 1974, there's an HHE 200 form somewhere, a septic system form, right? And if you have that, there's a soil profile description, and if they didn't find bedrock. Then you don't have it, because in areas of the map is bedrock goes up and down, you know. Some places it exists and some it doesn't. When they made those soil maps, the smallest thing they can show is 3 acres. Anything smaller than 3 acres is an inclusion, so you can have 3 acres of something that's not shown the bedrock, but it's in an area that's mapped as bedrock. So if you've got a septic system form, then that form is gonna say it, because it'll look at the bottom of the profile, and it'll say a 3A or 4A. The second, there's a number that goes from 1 to 12, and then right beside it, there's a letter. B, C, D, and E is water, A is bedrock, so it'll tell you.
So this form, was required after what date?
July 1st, 1974.
So that's after 74, okay?
Yeah.
So,
And that would be in the town with your septic
They,
filing?
the town should have a copy, and the state has a microfiche that's got a copy, but well, it used to be they've actually
Up to date.
scanned it in, so it was microfiche at one time.
it's now digital.
Now it's all digital, so you
Just
go.
don't count on finding it. 'cause
All right, Charlie, I didn't see you sneaking. Hi.
We tried it over in Smithfield, find all the records and couldn't find everything. And it wasn't just because they were all old. But some of them was because it was before 72 or 3. Others, either the state or the town didn't have the record, so it's, the incomplete records are, the norm, but,
Especially the old ones.
yeah.
In the 70s, the records were not great. In the 80s, they got better, and nowadays they're good, but it's the old ones. The plumbing inspector didn't necessarily send a copy to the state. And then the next plumbing inspector may not have picked up the other guy's records, and so they got lost. But the newer ones, since the mid-80s, you should be able to find most everything.
That's the only thing in the Keyser one, to just dig in a little bit, if you're gonna model yours after the Keyser one.
Right.
They say if there's no records, you have to be done right away. And then if you fall in this bedrock classification, then you have to be done right away. So I guess it would be up to the homeowners to go and find their records and see if they're classified as A in this septic.
So what do they
Design.
do if there is bedrock?
Yeah, that's the problem.
The septic system rules require the bottom of the disposal field to be 2 feet above bedrock. And that's fine, but bedrock does this.
Yeah.
So if a site evaluator went out and dug a pit and it happened to be in a little deeper spot and said bedrock's at 30 inches.
Yeah.
But then there's a bump that's 12 inches, I've seen this before, when they come in with a bulldozer and they scrape it off.
Yeah.
And then they put the stone down, and so if the stone is sitting on a fracture of the bedrock, you know what's gonna happen, it's just a go.
Yeah.
So that's
So
the
you put
concern.
fine soils in though? Can you fill in with fine soils above that stone?
If they did it right, when they bulldozed it to prepare the leach field and saw that. The elevation that's on the form said, put the leach field at this elevation, contractor should have said, I can't do that, I got a problem here. Call the site evaluator, he would redesign it and would bump it up into the ear. So it'd be 2 feet above bedrock, but that doesn't always happen. I got called in by DEP on 2 different subdivisions where wells are being contaminated by septic systems. And they thought it was the septic system rules that were fault, but they knew me, so they said, what do you think, Dave? I said, I wanna go look. And every case that there was a polluted well, I said, where is the closest leach field uphill? Went up, and stone was sitting on top of fractured bedrock. So it was a direct connection, and so I know that happens, and I know it exists. And I've seen it in several instances, so that's what the concern is, and nobody would, if this is the lake it's going into, not a well. They knew it because of the well test, but if it's going into a lake, you don't know it. And so the 100% of the leachate can go right into the lake and be pathogens plus nutrients. So that's what.
So how would you solve that? So how would the redesign solve that? It would raise the level of the
Yes.
leach field. And what would be between the leach field and the fractured bedrock? What would you put in there to absorb, neutralize phosphorus, let's say?
Yeah, my preference is that they don't strip all the soil off, and I put that in, I don't know if it's in that ordinance or not, but. In some of the things I put together to describe it, is the natural soil may have quite a bit of silt and clay. And phosphorus is a cation, it's positive. And silt and clay and organic, highly decomposed organic material is negatively charged, so it absorbs to its surface. So you want fine soil particles. But the only
Can you
way,
bring those in? Can you bring those,
it doesn't work because what happens is you're gonna get water through the ground. 50% of the volume of the topsoil is void space, and it's created by soil particles clumping together to form soil structure, and you've got voids between them, that's where the water goes. If you move the soil around, you destroy the structure, there's no place for the water to go. And so you can't use fine textured fill because there will be no void space and the water can't go. So you have to use something coarser, which is not as good. But it's supposed to have 2 to 8% silt and clay in it to provide some treatment. But my recommendation is that you make sure you know the shallowest place in your disposal field footprint. And don't let the guy with the bulldozer strip everything off the bedrock. Because if you leave the natural soil there and it's got its structure intact, water can go through it. But if you destroy the structure and use it as fill, it won't work.
If you raise the leach field, you have to raise the septic.
What's that?
If you raise the leach field, you'd have to raise your septic system.
I'm sorry, I don't hear well, I
If
can't.
you raise your leach field,
Yes,
you have to raise your septic system.
well, that is your septic system.
Oh, you mean the tank?
The
Yeah.
tank doesn't matter.
The tank, because
You can pump up to it.
That's
Yeah, I mean, obviously you want to go by gravity if you can, but if you can't go by gravity, then you have to pump.
The pump.
But if you care about the lake, you need to make sure that you don't have a short circuit, because those short circuits, nobody sees. See, that's the problem. When the wastewater comes to the ground surface, like if you don't pump your septic tank up. And the soil, septic tanks don't decompose all the organic matter, because they're anaerobic, they're slow. They fill up, that's why you have them pumped. So if you don't pump them, and it gets filled up with organic material, so there's no capacity to send the stuff out. It goes on your leach field, it plugs it up. Now the wastewater comes to the surface. And when it comes to the surface, if it's on your front lawn, it stinks and doesn't look good and people don't like it, so they do something about it. If it's out back, maybe not. But these short circuits, nobody ever sees. They don't look bad, they don't stink, you never see them. And they work forever, You got old cesspools out there that are in really suspect soils. And they're still working today, you can ask Charlie. I got involved with Charlie and Whitney on a project where we wanted to look at septic systems that I thought might have some issues. And nobody that had a cesspool in sandy soil would let us look at it. Because they know probably that's a problem, they don't want us to see it. So the only people that said, go ahead, you can use mine to evaluate, and it was a newer system that nobody had a question about, it was perfect. And I've done this in more than one watershed. People with the septic systems that are the most suspect won't let you look at it. George's Pond in Franklin, I did an evaluation actually of 6 septic systems that had been in, some of them were new and some of them weren't new. 5 of the 6 were real problems. Only 1 was working, I think, well. But people don't want you to look at it, most people do. Especially if they think it may be a problem.
So that's my concern, is I think anyone who had an infinitesimal amount of money would be fine with you saying, this is how you need to fix your septic system. In my neighborhood, a lot of the elderly have had these homes for years, like the one I'm telling you next door, I think is a problem, and I have an algae bloom that corresponds to my border with that house. They can't afford to fix it. So what monies can be raised, or state monies or something to help with that? Because I don't know what the percentage, but I would assume that there's a majority of the failed septic systems. People just can't afford to do what needs to be done.
It could be, there's a small community grants program that if you really do have a problem with your septic system, it's #1 priority is wells, but #2 is water bodies. And the town has to, plumbing inspector has to go through the process to get the funds, but if somebody doesn't have a lot of money, there is a mechanism. And I don't know what other mechanisms are out there, but if I had a place that's worth $1.5 million on a pond and it's starting to turn green, I would be willing to help kick in some money myself to help people if this was gonna save a problem, because like I said, you can only put so many nutrients over so much time into water body, and if it all turns green, you've lost an incredible resource. So I don't know where all the money's coming from, but the big thing is you have to make that connection of that leach field to the lake, and the state septic system program doesn't want to look there because it scares the crap out of them. But I got hired by FB Environmental down in Portland. The state of New Hampshire recognizes that 30 to 40% of their water quality in their lakes, ponds, and the ocean is due to septic systems. And they know that septic system rules are a problem. A lot of states like New Hampshire, they require to remove fine texture soil, put in coarse stuff so the water will disappear. And so they hired FB Environmental to do a study for them to recommend what should they do to fix the problem. And FB Environmental hired me as their expert to help them. And one of them was, we wanted to make their septic system rules better. And the other one was, don't allow them to put septic systems into the sand and gravel layers of soil of sand and gravel for new ones. Then, because all sand and gravel soils, if they have developed, have a topsoil layer that's fine and textured, because, when the glaciers melted 12,000 years ago, the ground was bare for a long time before it got vegetated, so there's a lot of wind blowing. So we accumulated some very fine sand and silt on the surface. You put the leach field there, you get treatment, that's where all the plant roots and the microbes are. They're not in the sand, there's nothing there from. So if you put the septic system in that sand, there's nothing there, there's no plant roots, there's no microbes, there's nothing, and it goes. Pew. So they recognize this, there's, New York is doing the same thing, North Carolina, Florida, there's a number of states that know they got a problem with septic systems, sandy, gravelly soils and bedrocks. So it's coming, and I'm at the head of the curve, I've been fighting this since 1990 probably. I got some things in these rules in 1995 to help provide treatment, as I said, this doesn't make sense, it's a problem. So until that really comes to the forefront, they'll need money for it. In the meantime, to me, it just doesn't make sense to say, I'll ignore these things, make believe they don't exist.
Dave, what
Because
would you,
if you're letting a straight pipe go right into a lake with nutrients. You know, I know it's a problem, that's why I said, if you have a system. That was designed by these rules and installed by these rules, that's insane. You shouldn't punish somebody for that, because they did what they were supposed to do, that's why he said. Identify these things and then fix them when you can, but you got an old cesspool. You know, the only reason a cesspool had to be in since before 1974. If it's that old, the only way it's working is that it's never used. Or a sand and gravel or a fractured bedrock, because they're way undersized and they would not work. If it was in a fire protection soil.
Dave, what would you estimate our runoff, nutrient flow into the lake, phosphorus is from septics would be in this area, in Belgrade Lakes area? What percentage of the total phosphorus or nutrient load you think is coming from septics?
I would, in order to give you that estimate, I'd have to look at a soil map and know how much sand and gravel you got.
A lot of it.
Lots.
Right, so if you've got a lot of sand and gravel, and you got a lot of old, you probably got a lot of old systems, because. You don't have really old systems in other kinds of soil, they don't work. So you got a whole bunch of old systems out there.
Yep.
Then you probably got a big load, because like I said, you get below the root zone. And when there's no silted clay, so there's no cation exchange capacity, there's nothing to take up the nutrients. The only way it might get taken up, and most of these sandy gravel soils are really high and they go to the lake.
Yeah.
If you went down into a wetland. So the groundwater comes up to the surface, now some of those plants in the wetland might remove nutrient before it gets to the lake, so a few boggy places will do that, but the stuff that's just straight sand and gravel. Nothing is being removed.
Yeah.
So could be like 20 or 30% maybe of the load?
Well, like I said, I would wanna know what percent sand and gravel do you have in your watershed,
Say 90.
where this can. So if you've got that many, and you got, you know, how many of these are old systems? So I would say pretty much all of the old systems are straight shots.
Okay.
Without,
So when it gets into the groundwater, you just assume that from the groundwater, it's just in the lake? Is that a?
right, that's the way the water goes, it goes to the lake.
Is it?
And yeah, so you know, what is gonna remove it from that water? What?
Gravity key.
There's nothing.
Oh, I understand that part, but I guess, what I don't understand, I just don't know the hydro.
The groundwater goes from higher ground to the lake,
That's okay.
that's the direction it always goes.
Maybe unless you're draining someplace else.
No, it wouldn't be in the watershed.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't.
Yeah, if you have an outlet stream and somebody's got a camp right near the outlet stream. Their leach field might drain to the outlet stream,
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah.
everybody else is
Yeah.
going right into the lake.
Darrell, our work that we've done in developing management plans for the lakes,
Yeah.
as a result of surveys, estimate that the load from septics is only what, 4 or 5%?
Somewhere between 2 and 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is probably very understated from what I'm hearing you say, Dave, right?
I think looking at the soil types was something that we only started doing about 3 or 4 years ago. And partly you had David's urging, and you're convincing me that it was a good idea. So they've started incorporating that in the management
They're
plan.
doing it now that I wrote a document on short circuiting soils. And they now require, like Jen Jesperson just got in touch with me, she's doing another watershed survey. And I updated it last December. So that is now part of their calculation, whereas before they didn't do that.
And she's done all our management plans, right, Jen?
Yes,
Yeah, so-
ever since mid-teens.
Hans?
Yeah, I got it. septic system designs, there's a rule that you cannot use fill soils that have not been in place for 20 years, and that was just knocked down for 40 years. Why is that rule?
The idea was that the fill material has to resemble original soil. It was, you know, in the shoreland zone, it's 40 years that it has to be in place. And that's actually to control growth, because you can take a lot that has terrible soil, put a little bit of fill in for a septic system, and now when you build on it, all the runoff is gonna go in the lake because the ground can't absorb it. So this would prevent that sort of thing from happening. The 20 years now is because, like I said, you need to develop some structure in the soil, and they figure after 20 years, you develop the characteristics of a soil that can absorb wastewater. So outside the shoreline zone, that makes sense. Inside the shoreline zone, there's a concern that a whole bunch of lots that were not suitable in the past, if you knew in 20 years, you took a lot that's worth nothing, and you put a bunch of fill in it in one corner, so you put a septic system, now that lot may be worth, you know, $500,000 because it's buildable. So it was designed to limit the amount of growth that happens along the lake. And my point has always been, I would prefer to have towns, lake watersheds, groups regulate development on the basis of the characteristics of the property, not the septic system. But right now, that's the only thing there is that limits growth. Nobody says if you got terrible soil, you can't build it. They just say if the septic system can't be put there, then you can't build it. So that's why I help fight to keep that there until people say, look at the whole characteristics of the kind of.
Dave, the Belgrade Lakes Association did a survey of, you know, the Great Pond, Long Pond, they identified sensitive soils, hybrid soils.
They use the NRC as publisher.
Is this something that's still valuable to us, or is that, should we, you know, when we're looking at?
It's a planning tool, okay? That's what I want people to understand. Those published soil surveys that were done by the Soil Conservation Service, which is now called the Natural Resources Conservation Service. The NRCS did this for every state in the United States and every bit of land in every state. And you can imagine how detailed they could make that work because they only had a limited amount of people and time. So they did, back in the day, they didn't have LiDAR and all these fancy stuff. They had stereoscopes and aerial photography. They do a little bit of checking here and there, then they would use stereoscope and say, well, this landform is the same as here, what we looked at. So we're thinking this is the same stuff. And they did a really good job most of the time, and it's pretty good, but it's not something they just want to hang it out on. And then, like I said, if it's in an urbanized area or right on the lake, they would map anything that's 3 acres in size or bigger, they would show it. Less than 3 acres, they won't show it. But outside those areas, or where there wasn't any development, it may be 10, 15, and 20 acres. Is the smallest thing they'll show. Anything less than that, they won't show the difference. So they call these things inclusions. And that's all I'm saying is it tells you, generally speaking, but before you make somebody do something, you wanna ground truth it. And if you've got a few people that have got septic systems that have been done by site evaluators, there's a mechanism to ground truth it. But even that is a little iffy. You know, in July 1st of 1974, we went from a perk test. This is what we call site evaluation, where we actually look at the soil profile, record things. Perk tests, you know, if you did a perk test in August, it might be great. But if you did it in April, it probably wouldn't work. It didn't tell you the water table was there in spring.
Don't they specify a period of time you do a perk test?
I think they allowed it. You know, at a wider range.
Places where I've lived before, it has to be done between February 1st and March 15th, and if it's not done in that time frame, you can't.
I don't think Maine did that, but I don't know, because I wasn't doing it back in those.
Probably didn't, because it was snow in those days covering the ground.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, right, that time of year, ground was frozen, but.
But anyway, what we do today is we record the textures and structures and all these sort of things, so we have that information. But when they switched on July 1st, 1974, from perk to site evaluation, they had to have a bunch of people licensed, so a whole bunch of people got grandfathered. And a lot of those people were not very good at what they did, let me tell you. In fact, when I did George's on evaluations, the same site evaluator did two of the lots I looked at. One of them was a sandy loam glacial tail with a hard pan, and he was right, that's what it was, and that one was fine. The other one I looked at, he said was the exact same thing, sandy loam glacial tail with a hard pan, and it wasn't, it was sandy gravel. So he was 100% off, so I went by his form. I would have said, well, it's the same soil type, we don't have to look at that, and I wouldn't have caught it. But the guy, and I actually knew the guy, his profession was that he was a printer, he had a little printing shop. And he got licensed on the side, but today, everybody is much better off, we have better programs and stuff. So the older ones are less reliable than the newer ones, but it is a way to make sure, you know, if you got newer septic designs in an area that's mapped as a soil of concern, and it says it's not that stuff, then maybe you wanna look at it. And that's why I said, if somebody's got a system in a suspect area, somebody like me, and I can teach any of you or anybody you want to, what to look for a general screening tool. With my little screw auger, in 10 minutes, I can tell you, yes, there's bedrock here or not, you know what's being bedrock, or if it's sand and gravel. And then if it is sand and gravel or bedrock, now you wanna look at it more carefully. And that can be done very quickly and easily without costing a lot of money. If you hire a site evaluator or a soil scientist to come in, they're gonna charge you $300, $400, $500 to do something. But if, you know, the staff, or your staff, well, used to be your staff, I can teach them how to do the screening thing quickly, easily, and say, yeah, we better look at this one more carefully, no, we don't have it.
So that would be helpful where you have identified algae bloom problems and you're trying to find the smoking gun.
Yes,
Well, from what we were saying though, if it's 20 or 30% of the systems, it'd be, each one contributing a fair amount, it seems like it would be useful to find it in lots of places. The question though is, when you find it, what do? You tell these people, well, you've got to move your septic field to another location?
fortunately, I'm a technical person. I leave that up to you guys, it's just, you.
Well, I meant that
You
in
got-
general,
you
what does
gotta know.
one do?
You gotta know it, okay, you've got to know what the problem is. Then once you've identified it, I wouldn't be surprised if DEP would find a mechanism, or EPA, to help fix these problems. The state might come up with money, if it was identified, if we got this out there. And you can't blame anybody for it,
Mhm.
then I think they come up with a mechanism, because the state of Maine has a big vested interest in having good water quality.
Yeah, well, actually.
How, state,
I would like to learn how to do that.
Well,
I could teach you, and it wouldn't take long.
I would like to learn how to do
We
that.
need to put this in an ordinance,
Yeah.
and,
Like smart,
and
you could do
I'm
that
not sure that the ordinance is gonna call for volunteers to go and.
She just wants to learn on her own.
I know.
Learn how to do that.
Absolutely, I think.
Because I have an algae bloom problem in my neighborhood, and some of my neighbors would welcome me doing that on their property
especially with a flashlight at night.
because I'm a neighbor.
I'm checking for worms.
Because we're all concerned, they would say, let's figure it out.
So Dave, I'm a little confused as to, a new septic system in, you know, since we have so much, I mean, we're in a sand pit here, they covered it with soil, so you can't see it, but you can see it over out that window.
Right.
That's everywhere. This is a big, you know, glacial situation. I've got off of my dock, I've got sand, you know, and I always wondered, how did they get that sand in there? But, so now I know. But, so how do you design a system in sand and gravel in today's world that's going to, assuming, I mean, I'm assuming you get sand and gravel, there isn't any topsoil. What's that?
See, if the site has not been developed yet, that's why I say you should have an ordinance that says for new sites
Yeah.
that are sand and gravel, there's always a topsoil. That's the way, like I said, in Maine, we had probably
I don't have a basement.
2,000 or 3,000 years before vegetation comes in, and there's a lot of windmill materials, so all of them have a topsoil. I'm saying, put this in the top of the ground, not down in.
Right, so don't dig out that soil,
That's
put it on
right.
top of the
Yeah.
soil, start with new soil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of how, I'm thinking about my area, you know, and how you would stick a.
That's for new ones, not for existing, for
Right.
new,
Yeah.
because new, existing ones,
So we should put, is that in the green?
I made that recommendation, I believe it's in there, but for new sites that have not been developed, if they're sand and gravel. Even if they're well drains and there's no water table in them, make them put the thing on top of the ground, because you're gonna get treatment, if you put it in it, you're not gonna get treatment.
Get it.
And so, if you get an existing system, the biggest issues of concern from septic systems is nitrogen and phosphorus. It's easy to get rid of the nitrogen, because if you take, your septic tank and take wastewater and put oxygen into it, and then put it into another tank that's got carbon in it and no oxygen. Microbes in there breaking down that organic matter will use, you know, if it's NO2 and NO3, which it will be, if you put oxygen into that wastewater, it'll oxidize the nitrogen. And when it goes into the other tank with no oxygen, the microbes will take the oxygen away, and it'll go off as a gas. Getting rid of nitrogen is easy. Phosphorus is not easy.
Right.
There were a few experimental systems, there's none approved in the state of Maine to get rid of phosphorus. So the best way to get rid of phosphorus, if you're gonna have a new system designed, I would have them bring in and put a layer of soil under the disposal field that had at least 8% fines. If you have to have a bigger footprint of the septic system for it, but at least you would get some treatment, and I'd make it, you know, a replacement system, I'd make it up high. Because again, if you're up high, then the wastewater will go out and filter sideways, you know, if you've got capillary pores in topsoil and gravity pores underneath it. In our world of soil science, that's called a lithologic discontinuity. The pores don't connect. Wastewater will go sideways before it'll drip down. It'll stay in the capillary pores. It doesn't want to go into the gravity pores. Will, if there's enough head to force it, it'll go sideways and it'll be utilized by plants and stuff. So replacement systems built on top of the ground, people don't like that because it's a big bump and it's, you know, it's not pretty. But I'm thinking you need to treat the wastewater, so that's what I would do. And we have drip irrigation systems that can be used in weaving around trees and stuff on the ground. There are techniques out there to make septic systems on existing lots that are being replaced. But if it's not being replaced because it doesn't, you know, reason to, then I'd say, that's why I said in the Brink one, this should be identified, and then if money becomes available to treat these systems, then they should be tackled, but not made. But if you got an old cesspool, that doesn't meet any standards, you know, of any sort. It's not like a system that was designed in 1985 and put into the sand that today we know is a problem. Right? That was done according to all of the laws and rules and standards and designs.
Good view.
Thanks. I should go start the other. Dave, thank you very much. Sorry I have to leave.
That's, I understand. It's not easy. I'm, like I said, I'm the technical guy, and I've been trying for 30 years to get people's eyes opened up about what's going on here, what we need to do. That there's a kind of nutrients that are going out, and this is a non-point source. You don't, it doesn't come up and bite you in the butt, you know, in 5 minutes from the time it happens, so you don't see it. That's the problem, is you don't, you know, if you have a factory and a big pipe pouring sewage into a lake, it wouldn't take very long for everybody to jump all over it.
Right.
But you got all these leach fields seeping quietly into the lake, nobody sees it, just like the runoff. Another issue I have is forestry operations that are in lake watersheds, not necessarily the shoreline zone. You know, they go in and they put in skid rows many, many times up and down a hillside, right down to the hot pan, and they make little brooks. They change the hydrology dramatically. And so that water gets into the lake quick, dirty, and not slowly and cold. there are a number of things out there that I think people need to be aware of, and if you take care of some of these things in advance. Then you don't have a problem. You wait until the scale is just about the tip, like with climate change. And it's awful hard to switch it, it's almost too late.
Right, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we perceive, we're at the point, I'm the water quality monitor for Great Pond, and, you know, it gets anoxic and.
You're getting close.
And that's an impaired lake, and.
You're getting close, and septic systems are, in Great Pond, I think they're a big problem.
Yeah, so we saw, Lenny sent around a book. Do you remember the author of that, book that he sent around a chapter from a.
Yeah. I don't recall the author's name. The book was called something Ripples.
Ripples, I think, but in any
It's
case.
recommended by Matt Scott.
Oh, Matt Scott, the biologist.
Yeah.
And it references a University of Minnesota study on phosphorus in short-circuited septic systems that it says might easily produce 4 pounds of phosphorus a year, and that studies have shown that 1 pound of phosphorus can grow 500 pounds of algae. So we're talking about 4 pounds a year, a ton of algae a year. Are you familiar with that sort of scientific study? Have you heard?
I do know that cause and effect relationship. I haven't studied the exact numbers, but I know it doesn't take a lot of phosphorus to flip the switch. And so that's why I say, like I said, forestry activities need to be looked at. Septic systems and sandy gravel and shallow bedrock soils. And vegetated buffers, I think, are all out in left field. The DEP understands that. I've handed them hard enough so that they're in the process of updating their, are going to be their BMPs, both erosion sediment control. I've been asked to help with that one and stormwater. So, and then you take the camp lots. I'm going to New Limerick in early July. They somehow found me. I don't advertise that I do this stuff. People find me and, so they're gonna come up and look at a gravel road up there that's, it's been a real problem. And it's causing some phosphorus to wash off of the lakes. So people don't understand how these things work. And so I'm just trying to get people's attention. That people need to be aware of all these things. So every one of these camp lots, I don't know how many times that Endicott Road I've been on YouTube. There's driveways up there, there's several hundred feet long, that the lot is all been made into lawn and big roofs, and all that runoff goes down the driveway and into the road ditch and into the lake. And it may be that that's a little outside the shoreline zone, so people don't even pay attention to it. You walk the road and you look, there was a run on Parker Pond that I did for probably the third time this spring. Everybody's looking at the lake and the camp lots on the lake. These on the other side, maybe back 300 feet. And there's vast areas of clearing with roofs and driveways, ton of water, all goes into the ditch, runs down, runs into the lake, carries all the sediment right into the lake. You gotta look at the whole picture. So if you just say the shoreline zone, somebody's got a camp that's just barely outside it with an acre lawn and big roofs and driveways and everything else, it all runs right down into the ditch. This is as big a problem, it's a bigger problem sometimes than the camp lot on the lake.
Right. Our issues that we're charged with evaluating the shoreline zoning ordinance and trying to tighten it up. Its Ripple Effects was the name of the book by Ted Rolsa.
No, I've never heard of it.
University of Wisconsin Press. I guess the reason I mentioned it was if we're going to go down the road of something like the brake ordinance, we're gonna need to justify a lot to planning board, select board, whomever,
Yes,
voters, why we're concerned about phosphorus coming from septic systems and, is 4 pounds of phosphorus and a ton of algae, is that significant?
I think if you look at, EPA has it documented, I don't remember the amount of phosphorus there is from individual septic systems, I can look it up again, but, you know, if the phosphorus is basically gonna not be attenuated at all, you can multiply that times the number of places you think are entering into the lake and say, here's the number of pounds of phosphorus that are coming in, and this is, you know, some of these are year-round places. This is how much phosphorus is entering into the lake. And so, and we know that it only takes a small amount of phosphorus to tip the scales.
Right.
So,
So that's kind of where we're coming from, anticipating that we're going to need to have our facts. Especially when you have people that are
yes,
denying science that you mentioned, you know, that are like your neighbors that are just don't want to, they don't believe in
They don't,
pumping. Yeah, so if you have people like that, we're gonna need to try to educate them and point them towards the research, and maybe Whitney King can help with that sort of thing.
he would have all the numbers.
He should have,
Yeah.
but I mean, he was, I mean, if it's 3%, 4%, or, you know, of the phosphorus going into the lake, at least I think that was coming from Whitney, he was,
No, that was based on models that, you know, actually Ken Wagner, is more used to this modeling for, you know, the activity in the watershed. And he's been very good on the alum treatment side, and working with Whitney. So Whitney's seen these numbers, but everybody knows they're an approximation. And nobody's done the science on the ground, you know, to really, you know, say that it's, you know, 18%. You know, and that because it costs money, and partly it's lack of knowledge, and then once you have the knowledge, you know, how do you actually study it and fix it, costs money.
But I would point out that what Dave's talking about is that we have these glacial soils or sand and gravel here that you don't find in most places.
It's not unusual, but it's not real common either.
Not real common, and so those figures are probably based on more common kinds of soils, which do a much better.
Well, I think you'll find that that document I put together on short circuiting sensitive soils
Mhm.
is going to change some of the models.
Yeah, well, right,
Because they didn't do that before. I think they just basically said, we've got X amount of the area in the shoreline zone developed. And so they assume X amount of phosphorus from those septic systems.
right,
They weren't taking into consideration those that are the most problematic.
right.
And I think that's gonna shift now and start changing.
This is the older model without that consideration, I think. And I think perhaps we here in this geology need to take that into account more than most.
I have a strange nitpicky question. So phosphorus is positive.
Yep.
Is there anything in this main septic code about disposal from water treatment, softeners, RO systems, going into the septic and flooding with more positive charged, so that that would put the soil at a disadvantage for capture?
I can tell you, I thought that for years. When I do septic system workshops where people install them, site evaluators every year. And I told people that if you have one of those devices, don't put it in your septic system.
Massachusetts, you cannot,
Well, in Maine, you have to.
but it doesn't matter, it's still gonna go in the water. It's gonna go in the water table, whether it goes into my septic or I
Yeah,
put
but
it
it's
in a dry
not-
well.
No, that is not phosphorus.
Right, it's uranium, it's PFAS, it's,
Well,
Arsenic,
I'm not saying
yes.
it's good, but it's not the cause of algae. So now, this version of the septic system that was effective in September last year. Now allows people to discharge that water in some other manner, but not put it in the disposal bin.
because I was thinking it would deplete the ability to remove phosphorus in the disposal field. If
It-
you're adding
there's a
more
lot of
positive,
iron in it too, and the
Yeah.
iron was causing an Ortstein to form in the sand and gravel field, which is a natural phenomenon, but once it becomes an Ortstein, it won't do anything, so there's iron pans being formed by discharging that stuff.
So, excuse me, what are you talking about?
So a lot of people now are putting in home water treatment systems to remove iron, water softeners, lead, arsenic.
We have a reverse
Uranium,
osmosis, we have
yes.
an RO system.
And that dumps the rejected water into your septic system, into your drain, that goes into your septic system.
Okay.
So 70% is probably captured by the carbon filter, but then it goes, the RO is rejecting these positively charged ions that are now going into your septic system. And if the soil's trying to grab positive phosphorus, it would be challenging it to grab the positive, whatever you're removing in your RO system.
Right, you're gonna use up a lot of the cat and chain sites.
Exactly.
Right.
And think of the people with just iron, they have water softeners and those regenerate and flush tons down into your septic system. So that's my concern is that's the next shoe to fall is that's gonna challenge the phosphorus grabbing capabilities, if nothing else.
It just needs to condensate from his boiler, which is very acidic, to neutralize that.
So anyway, these rules now allow you to discharge it on the
In
ground.
the dry well.
As a level, it can be a dry well, you can just discharge it on the ground. And my recommendation is you discharge it on the ground surface, you put a semicircular stone about a foot high around it. So when the water comes out, it hits that stone, it spreads it out, it goes across the ground surface.
Yeah.
And that way, you don't use up all the cation chain sites that are subsurface. So
But it would
I've
be
been
high in
telling
uranium.
people to do this for years.
It would be high in uranium if uranium is what you're trying to get rid of. So now you're
Spreading it around.
increasing your concentration of
And
uranium.
if you spread it on the ground surface, now you're spreading it out, you're not putting it subsurface when there's not much that can. I mean, subsurface has a very limited ability to do something.
Yeah,
You need to put the wastewater subsurface because of pathogens. That's why it's subsurface.
Yeah.
So people don't come in contact with it. But stuff that doesn't have pathogens like that, I recommend, if you spread it across the soil surface, it gets out over a large area, it gets taken up by trees and stuff, so you have small amounts over a large area. It's less of a problem than if you concentrate it, and that's why.
which is pretty far from your well, because then you would be pulling it back in.
Well, your well has a steel casing
Yeah, but the water
Down to bedrock.
trickling
down to
back.
bedrock, so
Yeah.
it should restrict that. I mean, I've got arsenic that even if it gets in the well, it's gonna come back into the RO system anyway,
Yeah.
so, I mean, I don't,
I just,
Anyway, you don't have to, you shouldn't put it in a septic system, in my opinion.
right, but there's nothing in there that says you can't.
No, you are still allowed to, like I said, I didn't fight it with these people for a long time, because all they did was pathogens, that's what the plumbing code is all about. Pathogens, and I've been trying to say, we got other issues that we need to take into consideration. So, we're pretty lucky the DEP doesn't call that a deep well injection and regulate those systems, because that is not domestic stuff, but politically, that's why they don't, so they leave it alone, but. Anyway, put it I want it on the ground surface, that's my preference.
wow.
So the other nitpicky thing I found in that Keyser proposal was that people would have to get their septics fixed within 90 days
If it's failing,
instead of a year.
if it's failing,
Okay,
that was if it's failing.
only if it's failing.
They only gonna make you, if it's a short circuit or it's failing, they're gonna make you fix it, otherwise. Used to be you had up to a year to fix it, but now they're saying if you got a failing system that's impacting the lake, you better do it quicker than.
Do we have enough septic companies if people start, if this ordinance goes through and, I mean, you get an increase of 100% of people who have to have septic repairs done. Do we have enough personnel to do the repairs within 90 days?
My personal opinion is the 90-day thing, if you discover you got a failing system in March, you shouldn't fix it in March, April, maybe not even May if it's wet. It should be done at a time of year when it can be done properly, because if you go out there when the ground is saturated or frozen, the odds of it working well are not good. So, say you discover it in November, so now you're gonna put it in by February. No, it shouldn't be done. So if you're gonna, I don't know if 90 days is a good number, and like I said, they're throwing out some things, they haven't taken it to people, you know, to make people do it, but if it's. If it's in, say it's June, July, August, September, October, and into November, it should be done quickly. If it's done any other time of year, they shouldn't be put in until they can be put in properly.
Well, another factor is the finances. I found several failed systems where the people that are first time home buyers within the first 2 years of ownership. They didn't have cash hanging, they had to go refi. And that takes time.
Right.
And, I mean, one girl, she going to actually today. And her system was discovered in January.
Yeah,
Or they
that's,
ask their parents to do it.
so the other thing is, you know, this is something I can do, but not everybody can do, but if you get a failing septic system, not all of those failures are gonna be impacting the lake or other people's health. So you've got wastewater sitting on the ground surface, but it's not running off into the lake. And, you know, you could fence it off or something like that, so nobody gets into it, or the pets don't get into it. Waiting is not a issue, it's not, you know, the big issue for an ordinance would be, whether it's impacting the lake itself, that's what your ordinance should focus on, like,
I just have them pump the tank, I calculate their
yeah,
capacity.
and use the tank, that's what people sometimes do, is use it as a holding tank. So, you know, and the state does require, if it's surfacing wastewater, they require you to fix it within a short time period anyway, because it's a public health hazard. So if it's, you know, town of Vassalboro passed an ordinance, and the only town I know of in Maine that ever did this, that said if you don't have a copy of your septic system form, they had to have your septic system replaced. And I got hired as a site evaluator to evaluate some of their systems. And I saw some of them that were undersized, they were in clay, and they weren't gonna probably last forever, but they had no impact on the lake. So I wrote a report saying exactly what they found, I said, this is not an issue for the lake. And they allowed the people to continue using that system until it surfaced and became a health hazard. Without making them put it in, because it was documented. On the other hand, I looked at one from one of our legislators at the time. That was on Weber Pond, it was like 30 feet away, it was a cesspool. That's all they ever had for like 75 or 100 years, sitting on top of fractured bedrock. They never even had to pump, nothing. So it just went 100% into the lake. But it never failed because, you know, it was never gonna back up. So,
And you couldn't do anything about that?
oh yes, the ordinance
Your
was in effect, so when it said this is what they got here, this is, they had to have a number of skill. Their ordinance kicked in and required it. Because there was 100% impact on the lake, and in fact, it would have been, state would have required that, even if the ordinance didn't. But they went through and they required everybody to do that, and some people dragged their feet. I remember one of them I looked at, they had this new system that they said that they had installed, and they didn't need another one. I drove into their driveway, they're sitting on top of a ridge, and there's a bunch of cattails growing right here, on top of this ridge, I said, I can put a beach here. And then there was a stream right down below it that was just run over.
I think there's a stream.
So there was a bunch of these people that wouldn't go along with it until they were forced to, and every one of them I looked at, it was like that. I know why, because they knew they had a problem and they wanted to fix it.
So Hans is our code enforcement officer and our plumbing inspector. So Hans, if you had somebody that had a problem, you know, with a failed septic system, unexpectedly and couldn't swing it right now, what is the process as far as enforcing the ordinance on that?
Well, I immediately notify them, you know, discuss it, and they immediately pump the tank. And their septic tank becomes a holding tank, so we calculate how many people are in the house, gallons per day, how fast that tank gonna fill. And, you know, one guy had pumping every third day. Recently, somebody's been pumping every 2 weeks. Sunset Grill, they want to do the same thing.
So that's what if they didn't do that?
In my notice of violation. Put a stipulation, they had to prove the pumping thing, send me a receipt. And if it wasn't done, they'd be fined $250 for that same day, which is the same as the cost of pumping, so they were gonna pay me or them or
So
both.
there's a fine, okay, yeah, I just wanted to know what, yeah, I mean, this is,
And is there a is there a time frame resolution for like, okay, you can use this as a holding tank for a certain period of time, but then you have to replace it or fix it?
The cement, the concrete septic tanks, you when you're buying.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes the baffle goes, but when they repair the septic field, they do the full inspection and they replace all the other. Baffles or whatever else might be bad.
Dave, question, how long ago was this in, Bastleboro? This is very
It
interesting,
was probably 20
a long time ago.
years ago.
So their ordinance, was this just for the shoreline zone that they required
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
So they're able, this is a question that's come up for us, the extent to which we are going to be able to require existing properties to, make changes like inspecting septic systems. So they were able to do that, obviously.
Yeah, it started out just saying if you don't have a copy of the septic system form, you gotta replace it. And I convinced them that if the purpose of the ordinance was protecting the quality of the lake,
Right.
just because I found something that didn't look like
Mhm.
didn't meet today's standards, but it wasn't causing a problem with the lake and it wasn't a health hazard. Why shouldn't they be allowed to continue? And they agreed, and so then they.
So these systems then were just, all systems were inspected or just the ones that didn't have?
If they didn't have, if they had a septic system form with a permit on it, they were considered, because that would have been after 1974, they were considered to be okay.
Oh, I see.
So they're trying to get the ones that didn't have a form or a permit, like the one that had the cattails on top of the hill,
I see,
said I have a
okay.
new system.
I see. Right, yeah, I
The
mean,
issue isn't so much the ones that have wastewater surfacing, that's the one he deals with all the time.
yeah, of course.
Because everybody can see it, it
Right,
doesn't look good, it smells good, and we know it's dangerous, so those get fixed, it's the ones that you don't see.
I understand that, right.
That's the tricky
I
one.
mean, the ones what we're considering, what we would likely want to do is, have septic systems within the shoreline zone inspected on some sort of ongoing basis, once every 3 years or whatever. And we're just.
And you should have it inspected once, and after that, you don't have to have the full-blown inspection, which can be expensive. And
Okay,
then you just walk and say, if it's not bleeding out on the ground and running,
okay,
because, once I know it's not short circuiting, it's never gonna short circuit.
gotcha, right,
So it'll never do that, and the only issue is gonna be, it's gonna come to the surface.
okay,
So then you could just have somebody that knows, walk around, is it spongy and soft and,
okay,
lush and, so wastewater's at the surface.
gotcha. I
That's,
understand, yeah,
so that's why I'm saying, to save money, if you're gonna spend $500 or $600 to have an inspection every 2 or 3 years, that's expensive.
right,
You don't need it.
don't need it, okay.
You do it once, now you know what you've got. And if it's not a short circuit, it's gonna come to the surface. That's the only two things you're gonna
And
do.
can you test for that short circuit just with that simple boring that you were telling us about? That you
I would-
could show
yeah.
somebody in a few minutes?
Yes. Well, first of all, what I do is I would auger into the soil to say, is it the kind of soil that can have a short circuit?
Okay,
That's why I said staff or somebody else can do that.
yes,
So if you've got a system, you said, okay, I think this may be, it's in an area that's mapped as sand and gravel. Somebody goes out there with an auger and augers that. I did that with Paul, was it Feinberg's house? He had me come and do that. So I augered down in and it wasn't the kind of soil that would be subject to short circuiting, but I went down in his leach field anyway, and there was a little bit of water sitting there. Which means if the water's sitting there ponded, it's not short circuiting. If
okay,
it's short circuiting, it just disappears.
right,
So, lay people can say, yep, it's sand and gravel, or bingo, there's bedrock. Now you get somebody that knows more about it, costs a little money. That way you save somebody considerable amount of money and don't make this any more onerous. Town of China passed an ordinance back a few years ago, I don't know if you heard about it. Scott Tears was a code officer, and I don't know why he did it on his own, and it was, in my opinion, ridiculous. Then he got in touch with me and a few other people and said, okay, we need to do something, because it was a petition drive to overturn that ordinance, because everybody said, oh my God. And they were right, so I got involved in helping revise it, but it was too late, people were so upset they wouldn't even entertain ideas. What you really want and what I'm encouraging is something that makes sense, but doesn't cost anybody any more money than it needs to. So like I said, if you're looking for sand and gravel, most anybody knows what sand and gravel is, right? If you dug a hole or you use a little auger, it doesn't matter which you do, and you come up with soil 2.5 feet down, that you can put a ball in and it stays together and it's got stuff in it, that's not gonna short circuit. It's only gonna short circuit if you can go right through it without slowing down. And so if you pull your auger out of the ground in the summertime and everything falls off the auger because it's so sandy and dry, now you've got a problem, potentially. So then you do the initial evaluation and see, is it short circuit? And if it's fine in texture and it's not short circuiting, you don't need to ever do that again. You just have somebody come out and take a look at it. Every 2 or 3 years, they walk around and no spongy, soft places. And that's not a big deal, doesn't cost a lot of money.
Is that the evaluation part of it?
That's the evaluation, because that's all you're gonna look for.
And how do you find those people?
Can
If
be
they're not,
anybody, he's gonna teach you.
I want to do it.
Anybody can walk
I'm not in
around.
Belgrade though, but I'll do it.
You know what leach field is, right?
Yep.
So you walk around it, and right at the toe of the field extension, if it's soft and spongy and mushy and sedges and rushes are growing, that's an issue. And if it's not, you don't see any of that out there, the ground's dry, it's growing grass, no issue.
Where are your bean boots?
Yeah.
Oh, I have
Hip
the
waders.
tall,
Hip
hunter boots. They're perfect for that.
Waders, yeah, right.
What's the toe of the fill extension?
You
Is
know,
that
if-
where it connects to the
If the
pipe?
leach field is built above ground, you know, say the leach field's this high, and there's a ground. The field extension has to go down to the ground in a 4-to-1 slope,
Slope,
okay?
yep.
That's the field extension, where that hits the ground. If this is all gravel fill, sometimes the water goes down, hits the surface, it runs through the gravel to the toe and then breaks out right at the toe.
What if it's not a raised leach field?
If it's, then you look on top of it. That's where the water's gonna come up, it's right on it, right on top. But systems built above ground, usually it's when the field extension comes out, that's when bleeding out's gonna be, because the elevation will push the water in.
What if the soil's full of moss?
Full of moss.
Is that any indication
If
of
you use it,
anything?
that means it's really, really droughty, which is good.
Just
Because
good.
if it's really droughty, that's probably a short circuit. Nothing can grow there because there's nothing in it. There's no water, there's no food, there's no nothing. So moss grows.
So it's bad.
Well, not, I mean, it may not be short circuiting. If it's, you know, sometimes they use a lot of coarse textured fill, but the ground underneath it is not coarse textured. So the moss will grow on that fill because it's dry and bone. But down where it hits the ground, it is filtering through the soil, it's okay.
Okay.
It just means it's usually desiccated.
So you can't tell by moss. You have to do the drill, the auger.
Well, for the short circuit, but if you see moss when you're walking around doing the evaluation, you probably won't. Because that means if it's spongy and wet, you're gonna have other stuff growing there, you're gonna have moss.
Okay,
So if moss is growing during.
the cattails are bad.
So during the initial inspection, moss might be a short circuit indicator.
Ah,
So the Brink ordinance, what, is this? Is this complete? I mean, is this what you think?
That's what he's proposing. I mean, I edited it to the point where I thought it made some sense.
Okay.
He put in there fines and all the other stuff. I didn't have anything to do with that. Technically, like I said, you know, if you've got a system that's been in, especially since 1985 and later, and it's got a form and a permit. The only thing you need to look at is it a possible short circuit if it's sand and gravel? And you can tell because the septic system form will show the leach field. And it'll show how far into the ground it's going. And you look at the soil profile, and if the profile says you've got 8 inches of loamy stuff over sand and gravel, and the system's in the ground 18 inches, now it's below that, so the odds are it could be a short circuit. So that would be the one you look at and keep on record as being one you take care of, if money comes up with it. because they designed it according to the septic system rule, they did everything right. So you did that the way you're supposed to, and so, that's secondary. The old, who knows what they are, that's what you should look at first, especially the sandy gravel. Because those are the biggest smoking guns. But after you do your original, for the newer systems, you do the original inspection. After that, all you should really have to do is walk around and look at it, and anybody can do that. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know what you're looking for. And you're just looking for things, wastewater coming to the surface that could run into the lake.
They're gonna spot it, or smell it, see it, gonna be, the plant life is gonna be.
You're there at the
different
right
there.
time of year. I mean, if you do in August, you may not see the water. Because you're not there at the right time of
Gonna be
year, but
green
you'll see the
plants.
sedges and this stuff, and you may see black in the areas where the wastewater is sitting on the surface. So in the spring and the fall, it might burn off. So you look for those signs that tell you that that can happen.
Yep.
That's the evaluation part is, are there telltale signs that, you know, if you're on a high and dry spot, you got rushes and reeds and sedges and stuff like that. Even though it's not wet, there's telling you this cattails like I saw.
Yeah.
It's telling you that, you know, you got, so that's all you're looking for. And so, you know, it doesn't have to be terribly expensive. If you weed it, winnow it down, 1985 and newer systems, that's on the back burner, because you're not gonna get anywhere politically forcing somebody to put $25,000 in a septic system that met every requirement of every rule and law to say that we think you got a problem, it's not replace it.
And that's 1985.
I'm just saying, yeah, because, you know,
But
the
if
first,
if that system is, short circuiting,
but I'm just saying politically, you won't get anywhere with that. You're not gonna, you know, somebody did everything perfectly right and it's,
right, but considering that most of, the property owners in Belgrade around that live in the shoreline zone, are not residents and not voting, so politically, you know, we've got an issue where we've got.
if you have 5 people that would be affected by that, they're gonna get really upset, and anybody's gonna get upset. I would be upset if I did everything right, and I,
Right, but. So we have two things. One, we have, okay, we're trying to identify systems that are failing and hurting our lake. And then we've got a financial issue is the other thing. So if we separate those, and we focus, okay, we gotta do this, we gotta stop phosphorus from getting in the lake. And then we've got people that have a problem, we've got to help find financing for them. Those are two separate issues, so, I hate to just say, well, we just can't touch that, we just can't, don't even go there. Because I don't, we're talking about the tax base of the town of Belgrade, we're talking about the enjoyment of, you know, the whole economy here is built on decent water quality.
Yes.
That goes down the tubes if we get a bloom like North Pond and East Pond, you know, if that happens in the lakes in this town, then that's just a serious issue and.
you're right, technically you were right. It doesn't matter whether it's a new system that somebody did
Yeah.
everything right, or it's an old cesspool. The lake doesn't care if all the nutrients are getting in it. So you were right technically that you should be looking for short circuits in any sand and gravel soil regardless of the age of the system.
Right, okay.
Yes, you're right.
So another question is, you know, if a property has been a seasonal property, a seasonal camp, and now it's a year-round house. If it's, you know, and then one that now it's being Airbnb, VRBO'd out, so there's a lot more usage of the property than it was 20 years ago, let's say. Does that, I mean, that really doesn't matter, does it? Or,
Yeah, in my opinion, you know, it may be actually good because they got a cesspool, it may fail, and then you'd be, you know, then you'd have to replace it.
yeah, I mean, if it's gonna become a bubbling as a surface or something smelling, you
Yeah.
know, they're gonna get bad
Never
reviews
said, of course.
or whatever, but I guess if it's, if the system was designed correctly, I mean, the usage is not a big deal, or,
The biggest issue is using it all year long. You know, if you're seasonal residents and you use your septic system only in, you know, mid-June to Labor Day, then that's the driest time of year. There'll be evaporation and, you know, some of the wastewater just won't go all the way down and get sucked right back up again because it's not a low water and it's the driest time of year. But if you're there in March, April, May, October, November, December, when the groundwater table's high, there's no evapotranspiration. Then now you've got all of it and you've got water to carry it out into the
so
lake.
it does matter
The
what.
time of year is more important. The usage is a little bit of an issue, but it may cause a system to fail. That's the biggest issue, but the time of year that's used is pretty important.
How do we reflect that in an ordinance?
I don't know how you can.
It did say something in the document we were reading. What was the name of the town that we're reading?
He's a,
The keys are one.
he's a lake.
Anything in that document that we should make stronger in our document that you can think of?
You know, if it was up to me, I would say, okay, let's prioritize what we are going to do. If you throw this great big ordinance out there with all these issues, it's, you know, potentially gonna get people upset and you may or may not make it, I don't know.
Yeah.
But if you say, here's the issue, and it's this broad.
Yeah.
Now, what our plan is to start attacking this from what we think is the biggest bang for the buck.
Yeah.
And the old cesspools that are 40 feet from the lake are the biggest bang for the buck.
Yeah.
And so, and everybody agrees, you know, that that's probably not a good thing. So it's easy to get that through.
Yeah.
And then you can implement things as you go on in a sliding scale.
Would you draft an ordinance that would attack the highest priority, potential offenders, and then come back and draft another ordinance 3 years later to go after something else?
If it was up to me, I think I would do it piecemeal because I think you've got a much better chance of making it work.
Yeah.
You know, because like I said, I look at China and other towns that have dabbled in this thing, and if it's too broad, it's gonna affect so many people that they might get killed and you might miss what you really wanna get, and you really wanna get those old cesspools out of it, you know,
Yeah,
insane and gravel at 40 feet from the lake.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I don't think there's a single person out here that would agree that that's,
Well, how do you earmark those?
what's that?
I mean, how would we identify that?
Well, if they don't have, you know, I would say if you do not have, it's called an HHE 200 form, septic system form. If you don't have a septic system form with a permit in the shoreline zone,
filed with the town of Belgrade.
well, it wouldn't matter. If you've got a HHE 200 form with a permit, then the town of Belgrade had to issue the permit.
So, well, okay.
So if you've got.
Either the
a system with
owner
a permit,
has that in a file that, of the camp that hasn't burned down, or. I mean, what if they, like, well, geez, I don't know where that form is, I think I had one.
you just, all you would say is, if you don't have it, and they can go to the town to look for it, if they don't have it, or they can go to the state.
Okay.
So if you can't prove what you've got, then it's gonna be evaluated. Because those are the most suspect systems out there.
Yeah.
And so,
So how do you attack that?
I would just say the same like Vasselberg did, you're in the shoreline zone, and you
You pass
don't.
an ordinance that
Yeah,
says,
if you don't have the permit, the form and the permit, then you have to, Vasselberg said you had to replace the system. I would say you have to have it evaluated.
that seems to
So-
Evaluated or inspected?
evaluate.
You know, I don't know if I would use this, the full, you can say it either way, you can have a full-fledged state inspection if you want. Or you can have,
Which costs $500?
$500 to $600, I think.
I don't know what they charge, but I'm guessing it's gonna cost probably
What do you,
$500.
what do you think?
So evaluated would be better.
Do you know, Hans, what it?
I have no idea.
Be cheaper.
It's just since September that this has been required by.
Well, keep in mind what Tanya asked is, how do you find the cesspools? We started out with a ordinance
Well,
that's
this-
basically
this
gonna
would
get rid of
just-
the cesspools.
Right, this would just take everything that's, you know, it would include cesspools, but it might include other things like trenches and stuff.
Yeah, but that are not real septic systems.
Yeah.
Would they have that?
So
form
therefore,
if
you
they
really
have
don't need a full inspection.
No,
You
just
just need an
an
evaluation to find out what's there.
Like $100 evaluation.
You know, it's almost impossible to find out what's there, you know, as a site evaluator, and I've been a site evaluator for almost 50 years. I don't even know how to figure out what's there.
Oh, really? Okay.
How would you do it? You don't know what's there, okay?
Okay.
Find a tank.
The only thing you can do is if there's a tank, the official inspection is supposed to use a camera that's on a wire that goes down, follow the pipes and stuff out.
Okay.
So, you know, my experience of that up on George's Farm, we did that. The old systems, none of them could put the wire down the line because they were all plugged up in roots, you know, the old systems.
So does that mean that that system doesn't work?
They would just, water was just going out the tank, you know, leaking out of the tank into the ground, that's how it was working, it wasn't going out the pipes. Good. But, you know, to me, if you can't prove you've got a legitimate system, and the site evaluator can come in there, if you've got a legitimate system, say it was put in 1983, and there's no paperwork anywhere. Well, you won't look at it, it's probably a mound with a fill extensions and stuff, and you can prove in short order, yep, that's a legitimate system. And besides, I don't even care if it's legitimate, all I care about is it impacting the lake, like I did in Vassar. So say it's a trench, but it's in pine textured soil, so it's not short circuiting, because it's sandy loam glacial till, they can't short circuit in that kind of soil. And it's not shallow bedrock, and his groundwater is not surfacing, I don't care. It's not affecting the lake. So I don't care if it's substandard, right? You care about the lake, not whether it's standard.
Right now, we're just trying to.
So that's what I'm saying, is that's what the evaluation would be.
So it'd be, once again, an evaluation.
Is it short circuiting or is it surfacing?
An evaluation would tell us that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how do you find, aside from you, an evaluator?
Any site evaluator could do what I'm recommending.
So you Google site evaluator and have,
Yes, and say, this is what we want done, and they can call me and I'll tell them, this is what we're looking for. We wanna know if it's impacting the lake, and the two ways it impacts the lake are short circuits or if it's running across the ground.
Yeah.
And if it's not doing either of those, then that's not what you're concerned. You know, somebody's 200 feet from the lake, flat ground, clay, even if there's a little bit of wastewater on the surface, if it can't run into the lake, it's not short circuited. That's your code officer's issue, that's a health issue, but it's not lake issue. So your ordinance should be, you know, all you care about is the lake.
We care about
Right?
We're here.
So all the other things, I don't care if it's a 30-foot long trench and it should be 100 feet. You know, it doesn't have piping, the inverted V planks are not in great shape, you don't care about that. It's either surfacing and can run into the lake, or it's short circuiting, and if it's not, I don't care. It's another issue, and we'll let that fall into the realm that all other systems everywhere else in the state fall into.
Yeah.
So that's why I say it doesn't have to be terribly onerous or expensive.
What do you mean by a trench? You mean an open trench that the?
No.
Goes into?
In the old days, a lot of times they would dig a trench 3 feet wide, put stone in it and pipe or inverted planks that come down like this with little boards across them, so the wastewater goes underneath. It's like an old chamber.
Oh, okay.
And so the water would sit underneath it
Mhm.
and then they'd cover it over, so that's a trench.
Wood planks?
Yeah.
And how long would those last?
If they use pressure treated, it lasts a while. But see, again, even if it rotted, it's not in great shape. You know, your issue is it affecting?
Is it affecting the lake?
So, you know, if you really wanted to dig up a can of worms, you could look at probably 90% of the septic systems out there and find something wrong with it. But do we really want to? No. What you really want to do is make sure it's not affecting the lake. The code officer wants to make sure it's not a public nuisance. But your issue is not whether it's a public nuisance. You might, you know, the evaluator says, you know, you've got wastewater sitting on the ground surface, that's not good. That's a malfunction and that's a health hazard, but that's not your job. Your job is to start affecting the lake. And if it's not affecting the lake, you're only forcing people to do something that's impacted the lake. That's an easier solve, right?
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Good point. That's a good point.
Okay, now we're 10 minutes after 5,
I don't know if
so
you
we're
want to
over time
back to
right now.
property.
It's too interesting a subject.
It really is. And Dave, I think to have somebody who's been doing it forever is awesome because we're sitting there, you know, we know what we want to protect the lake. We just don't know how to get there, so.
Nobody else does it. I'm trying.
I know. It's interesting. We're not the only ones that are wrestling with this issue, and hopefully the state will improve as
I
well.
think that would uncover such a can of worms.
I won't be there.
Until somebody makes a very good documentation of what's happening out there and proving this issue, they're not gonna do it because it would cost too much money and be politically unpopular.
Some college.
Dave, what's that form again that you mentioned, that
HHE -200.
400?
Yeah.
What's
Health and
What's that?
what did HHE stand for?
Health and Human
Services.
Services, engineering, I don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna.
That's, the program used to be called, Health and Human Services or something like, so.
Yeah.
Department of Engineering,
Dash.
HHE -200.
Okay.
And there's several others out there, there's a 204 for replacement systems and there's other, but anyway, that's the basic form, and so if they've
Just so
got a
we have
form with a permit, then they are legitimate. If they don't have a form with a permit, then they may or may not be legitimate, so you would approve whether they are or not, and then it's determined whether they're an impact on life. And that's a simple little ordinance. If you start there, you gotta make great inroads, make a big difference.
Yeah.
And then you can look at newer systems and maybe short circuits.
Say,
okay.
could you have a cesspool and have one of these forms approved? Is that possible?
No,
Okay,
they were
that-
not allowed since the,
That's the answer to your question, Lenny.
yeah, no, they have not been allowed since the 74. They could put something like that in for the laundry. Wastewater.
Oh, well, for gray water,
Right,
yeah.
just-
What happened in 1974 that all of a sudden this came up?
Because there were too many systems failing and Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin came up with the site evaluation formula because they said, we got a problem out here. We need to figure out where the water table is when it's not there. And if we look at soil properties, why can't we design a system? You don't have to time the water to go into the ground. If we do that X number of times on certain kind of soil, now we know what it does. So they know what the perk rate is based upon its soil characteristics.
Yeah.
And now the big thing is identifying hot pants and the groundwater table. That's the big thing we do now, is we look at the soil and we say, this is a wet soil or not a wet soil on that basis. It's probably my wife saying, I thought you did it right.
They've got a lake right at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. It's probably affected, probably why they jumped on it, because that lake is probably
Well, there's a
affected.
lot of lakes.
Right at the camp.
But you know, we developed this system in 1974. And the system has almost not changed at all, which is remarkable.
Yeah.
One change was made. In sand, you could put in a very small system. Some sand is a lot finer than other sand. And a fine sand didn't work well, so now we say medium. That's the only change
Wow.
in 50 years. I mean, the system really works, and other states, jumped on board because it's a really great system, but the only thing is, it doesn't take into consideration.
That must have been the must
Yeah.
have been the clean water and all that.
They didn't.
Bedrocks didn't work.
The lakes were probably pretty much all nice and clear and clean at that.
Nobody
point.
thought about it.
Well,
They figured that the water would be treated. You know, in most of our soil in the state of Maine, 3/4 of our soil types. It's so fine textured, it can't go very fast anyway, the capillary flows pull it up and you get treatment in the microbes in the plants. So most of our soil works anyway. The only time it doesn't is the sand and gravel and then fractured bedrock that it sits on.
Yeah.
So that's why I say we can narrow this down.
And what's the evaluation for the fractured bedrock? The auger does the sand sand and gravel.
Yeah, it doesn't go down further.
But what is the evaluation criteria for fractured bedrock?
The bedrock is a little trickier because if you've got big rocks in the ground,
I know.
you know, it may be hard to tell. So sometimes you're gonna have to actually do more investigating, but if you're hitting rocks, but in places you don't hit them, it's probably rocks. And the other thing is, when you hit bedrock, it has a solid sound, whereas it kind of rings, but if it's just a rock, because soil's around it, it's a deader sound. So if you did this in the amount, it sounds a little different. That one takes time to figure out. But, you know, if it's shallow bedrock soils, almost always you'll see outcrops somewhere in the area.
Yeah.
And if you don't see outcrops anywhere, you're probably hitting a rock. So, you know, if the guy dug his foundation, you know, to put in his basement, and he dug it 6 feet deep, 8 feet deep, he didn't hit bedrock. So that's proof. So, you know, if you got the foundation, which is not far away from the leach field, and there's no bedrock. If there's no foundation because of bedrock, now you. So there are other ways of making, you know, those kind of determinations, narrow things down.
You've been doing this a while, haven't you?
I retired 4 years ago and I still do it. My wife says, now you can go to games because you're retired, you don't have an excuse,
Right.
so.
Great information.
Great,
Thank you
yeah,
very much.
thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Dave, so much.
Appreciate your time.
for helping us out
I
here.
care about the subject and, you know, this is important to me, so I encourage you to keep reaching out to me and,
We will.
you know, if there's any way I can help and I can help train people to look at soil types.
Yeah, great.
Things like that. I'm in Belgrade Village almost every day. If the dam is open, they shut it.
Are you fishing now? We have your numbers, so we will.
I need the number.
Where do you live on Roll Table?
In Augusta.
In Augusta.
Do you ever go to the town meetings to help sell this to the voter? No, okay.
I would, you know, I would come with a group of people at some point in time to provide some.
Like a public
information.
meeting.
Worth it to have.
So I would.
Tell Andy to have it come
I
to our meetings.
I like to stay technical, but, you know, this does,
No, we should get it.
this concerns me and this,
for Pat.
even if it wasn't that I preached a lot, I think it's a shame
We
to
should get
see what's happening to our water properties.
We
So
can- we can report it, but it won't be the same.
How is the fishing?
this year was not great. I think there was too much water.
Yeah.
Definitely too much water.
And so, I think, the fish usually come up to the dam, that's where I fish.
Yeah.
I think they stayed out in the lake, and the rainbow trout spawned out there because of so much current, they couldn't make it up. So by the time the water calmed down, they done spawning, so,
Gotcha.
they got
So,
spared by,
there'll be more of them next year.
that's true, they'll be bigger.
It'll be bigger, yeah, that's right.
Can we talk about next meeting
Yeah.
for 1 minute?
Yes,
Before we break up?
Do you need me or?
Only if you wanna listen, John, next meeting still in 2 weeks, correct?
Yes.
Okay, we've invited John Blaze, who is Deputy Director of, I think is it planning and ordinances in City of Auburn?
He hired me to come down and help them revise an ordinance down there for septic systems.
Okay.
Oh, great.
And they're looking at erosion issues as well, roads, development, and septics, affecting Lake Auburn in particular, but also other water bodies in the town. And so they're in the process of developing new ordinances right now. So I think his experience will be helpful, for the group, to consider all.
They had that big problem in Lake Auburn a few years ago, didn't they?
They've used, a couple of treatments, including alum to, yeah.
They had an ordinance in Auburn that required septic systems to be installed entirely below the ground surface. So if they're in the ground 2 feet, you're gonna be at least 12 inches above the groundwater table. So the groundwater table had to be 36 inches deep or deeper in order to put a septic system in Lake Auburn watershed. And in Maine, the only soil that we have that is that deep on the water table is sand and gravel. Because everything else is a hard. So they made people put septic systems into sand and gravel layers. And then on top of that, I got involved in one project site. Somebody discovered that they had some of the sand and gravel, and it wasn't very far from the lake. This person was back a ways, I don't know, hundreds of feet from the lake. But he couldn't put his septic system in the hard pan glacial till soil that was perfectly fine, that was probably 1,000 feet from the lake. They had to go down like 300 feet from the lake and put it in sand and gravel, and then everybody else, they sold them the right to put their septic system, and they had like 15 septic systems in sand and gravel, in one little spot on top of the lake. And they had to have a sewer line getting all the way down there from all these houses. And it was like, oh my God. This is so ridiculous, and the idea was to control growth in the watershed. They had to have 3 feet, but inadvertently, they made everybody put septic systems in sand and gravel. So I said, you gotta kill that. You can't do that, you know, so.
It never got implemented?
I don't know if they passed that ordinance, but the city council, I think, did, because they, like I said, they hired me. They said they wanted to change it to 12 inches of the groundwater table. That wasn't my idea. That was their idea. Nobody asked me if I was behind it. I wasn't. I didn't care. You could make it 3 feet, but if you made it 3 feet, they could put the system on top of the ground, I'd have been fine.
Yeah.
But don't stick it in sand. That's what they forced them to do. Well, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You guys know where I am, so you can find me.
What's that?
Oh, that's a full stop. Good session, guys. Thank you, guys.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good information.
Now you wanna be treasurer?
Awesome. Yeah, so,
You still gotta.
let's,
Wait, we're just trying to get up.
So it's every 2 weeks.